then you have the question of like, there's introverts and extroverts, there's social butterflies, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because like when we think about like, I've come across leaders that are just that are totally okay with being in the back,
Big time.
never having to speak in public.
Mhm.
All the Excel sheets, they're great at Excel, they're great at they're great at, and they intentionally have gotten those positions and then like never make a public appearance. That's the type of leader that they want to be. And for me, that was like, that's for me, I thought that was a little weird, but that seems consistent with their personality.
Exactly.
And the idea of networking for those people to be a social butterfly, I don't even know what that
Oh,
means. You know what I'm saying?
painful.
But it's the different personality types that you get in leadership, right?
Yeah.
So it's not
Yeah.
so much that, like in my situation, whether I can make the jump from personal space to a professional space in this social butterfly sort of scenario. But like considering like there's different types of people and there's different types of, I don't know, approaches to networking or building relationships, right? Because like for me, building relationships is an easier way of thinking about it. But
Yeah.
for other people, for antisocial people, or like I don't want to call it, I
No,
mean, I don't know, the different personalities, building relationships
it's too
is not
hard.
necessarily a better thing. It's just like, what do you mean building
Yeah, I
relationships?
don't know. I had my 5 people, right? I got that's the 5 people I want to trust. Yes, do it. Don't give me somebody else. No. I think
No
if
new
you look at
friends.
most companies or most org charts or whatever, you'll see kind of the personalities in a way, right? You'll see who's the front-facing person. You'll see who's the communications person. The IT person, super brilliant, super leader, right? But it might not necessarily be the one going out to the cocktail parties, right? The finance person también, right? So there's leadership everywhere, but they're all different ways of interacting. I used to be involved with a bunch of research for a while, right? Doing SC stuff. And that's a whole different realm of like networking, right? They were talking about shop and they were talking about human resources. I mean, it was, I was out of my element, but it was just interesting to see what they were like. They were giddy about that stuff. Like they were excited about regulations and feds this and feds that. And I was like,
Wait,
God,
what
get
was
me out of
this?
here. It was a USC. I was under the Office of Protection of Research Subjects. So they
Oh
dealt with
snap!
all the
So whenever
regulatory
somebody
stuff.
does a study, the permission that goes beyond
Yeah, yeah.
behind whether that study is feasible, whether it's okay,
Whether it's ethical, whether it's safe, and then there's like
ethical. Yeah.
tons of federal regulations. I mean, it was a different way of looking at
Oh,
doing
wow.
work, right?
Wow. Okay.
So I was there for many years. I was a community member, but I was also like a graduate student mentor, and I was helping
Interesting.
students from all over the university trying to like pass their projects to be able to go do their project,
Yeah.
right?
The IRB.
The IRB. That was,
ARB.
so I was it. I was that guy for a long time. But in going to
Wow. What do you mean
those
you were that guy? You were part
conferences,
of the committee?
I was part of the committee for
That
nine,
is
nine, 10 years.
awesome.
Mhm.
What?
Wow. Wow.
That is
For
Wow.
USC,
great.
for USC, part of the social behavior one. So the ones that got to the top, that like, no, we had to discuss as a board, this and that. So I was there for a while. But te digo, even that was like, yes, I have a doctorate, yes, this and that. But those folks had like 80 articles and procedures this and chair this. And so I was like the tadpole in that big old pool. So even that was a different way. What I leaned on in that situation was, well, why am I here? The reason I'm here is because I have a first gen point of view. I have a community point of view. I'm a working professional, right? So they want to hear this. They don't want to hear my like theoretical da da
That's
da.
right. That's right.
They want to hear.
Yeah.
A good example is a study I wanted to do and go to South LA. I wanted to take USC students to go do A, B, and C to gang members. And I was like, y'all, USC colors are red and yellow. You're not going to go to certain parts of South LA wearing red. That's just not going to happen. That's not safe for the students. That's not safe for anybody. But that wasn't going to come from a professor emeritus, da da da, right? It was going to come from somebody from the community to tell them what's up. It
Mhm.
was going to come from somebody who's been in those streets and say,
Yeah.
you know what, that's not safe for a researcher, let alone, a 20-year-old undergraduate student, blue-eyed, blonde hair, right? Like you're going in the wrong neighborhood looking like that, right? So I think that's where I was going back to. Like I leaned on my strengths there, and I just
Okay.
kind of shared what I was able to share, and I felt confident about it.
Yeah. We're
So
not. We're
that,
not. Yeah.
Talk
We,
about
we,
a great in I mean, crossroads between theory and practice. Like as somebody who has a background in philosophy, the idea of having conversations like that, I don't know. When I heard that, I was like, because I always thought about the people that were part of the committee, you know, and having these conversations and reading proposals, reading dissertations, and literally trying to hash out whether or not it's going to be approved or it's something that they want. You know, in an institution like USC, who's doing really cutting edge, you know, like you always think about how technology runs ahead of all the ethical frameworks. And so this committee, to some extent, is on that cutting edge of these conversations with an institution like that.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine how interesting these conversations were. But you're right, though, in terms of like having that community perspective. Like, as a 49er fan, I never wore red for most of my life being from Salinas, you know what I'm saying? And the idea of putting a red shirt on, not only for my own personal sort of like as a person of color, for my own personal safety, but not to disrespect a certain area where they find that offensive, right? For better or worse, for good reasons or no good reasons. It can really affect the way you interact and you build relationships with these spaces, you know. But that's not something like for somebody who lived that their whole life. You know, I did not wear red. I do not wear red when I go to Salinas. I consciously like I do not wear red. That's something I never, or blue for that matter, but red specifically because you know as a sports fan, that's not something I think about.
Yeah. I brought into the leadership seminar on Friday an alumni from the first cohort, a couple alumni from the first cohort that I ran. And they mentioned, so some of the things that we talk about, I think, right? Argelis mentioned it, Jose, you mentioned it there, is that we're building from our assets and we don't see them as assets oftentimes, right? Like we think we're trying to tap into the canon, their body of knowledge, et cetera, that body of knowledge, right? And how we don't, compare. It's like, but there's that, and I'm glad that you brought it up, Argelis, is that you brought your lived experiences as that wisdom and that contribution to that space. And it's an asset, right? And I remember thinking, an individual mentioned before the leadership program, I didn't anticipate, I came in and it was a networking thing. And I didn't anticipate going culturally deep and getting reconnected with me as an individual, my cultural identity. And then realizing that, that before that, I was just perpetuating the white dominant society of doing things. And I was, I was able to reflect and free my thinking around bringing cultural aspects of myself into my leadership space. So the check-ins are different, right? The relationship building is different, where those are now assets, not something, that's done very differently.
Yeah.
So we bring that. That's what we got, right? We're moving, we're shifting, we're redefining, shifting leadership and how it gets right, how it's manifested with colleagues and in our organizations.
Yeah. But it's not to our fault, right? Like if we haven't been in that space before, if we don't know what it looks like, if nobody's modeled that before, we're gonna play or kind of mimic to what we think is happening in those rooms,
right?
But we haven't been there. So then once we're there, right? Once we get to interact and be part of X meeting or X event or whatever, they're like, oh, okay, this feels like, and then you kind of make it your own, right? Or get to the point where it feels comfortable for you. So you kind of let your guard down and figure it out for yourself. So I think that's the token there that we gotta first get into these places or spaces and then be able to start making them our own. So we're always going to be thinking or mimicking what we're seeing in the movies or what we've heard or it doesn't happen that way. Who's a great networker is my 7-year-old. He has no shyness. She'll out me in front of everybody that I'm a professor of this, that I do this, I do that. So that's the other part too, right? You have no idea who's your cheerleader or advocate until you start going out there, right? Because part of the events or networking opportunities, there's going to be other people who are like, oh, well, I worked with that guy before, or you know what, I saw him speak over there, or they did this workshop, or he used to run this, right? So there's all kinds of like advocates / cheerleaders out there that, unless you screw people over, but that should be on your side, And then the opposite is true too, right? Like if you ever was like, not just to somebody or mean or not cordial, right? They're gonna remember that and they're gonna say like, no, ese way, blah 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 blah, right? Like it's that happens too. So both ends, corre la voz, and it's all about you want to have more positive on your side than not.
Got it. Nice.